without eye drops, we assess the persistence of SVT and treat only if there's persistence for more than 50% and assess the maternal condition before treatment. If there is SVT with eye drops, in 37 weeks, there is a generalized focused effort at transplacental therapies because, as Dr. Mani said, these are the fetuses which give instant gratification because with in utero therapy, these fetuses respond very well. But at this same point, we must monitor the mother for development of risk of mirror syndrome and preeclampsia. So monitoring the mother is most important. And our aim is to avoid preterm delivery to avoid associated morbidity. So coming to SVT with rate between 200 to 220 and there's no eye drops, we must assess the cardiac function and structure. This is unlikely to cause hemodynamic consequences and may not warrant immediate intervention. And if the function is good and fetal well-being is not compromised, we just may need to monitor this baby with heart rate and function, antepartum fetal monitoring, and daily monitoring of fetal movement. But if the SVT is persistent with a rate of more than 220 and no eye drops, then we usually admit this pregnant woman for fetal heart monitoring for 24 hours, coordinate with our pediatric cardiologist, and do the assessment on admission because we need to start this mother on transplacental therapy. So we rule out relevant cardiovascular maternal paternal history, review the medications, check her blood pressure, confirm that she has a normal maternal ECG, check her normal laboratory tests like serum electrolytes, magnesium and calcium, and additionally we check her platelets and thyroid function test. If the SVT is more than 50% of the time, then those are the candidates that we start maternal therapy. Otherwise, if it is less than 25% or 25 to 50%, then these babies are usually just kept on monitoring. But if the patient has an SVT and an eye drops, then we begin treatment regardless of the duration the fetus is in SVT. Again, as I said, we have to see whether the baby is more than 37 weeks. We might discuss a short trial versus delivery. And the short trial is usually with an effective agent like a flecainide or a sotalol for 48 to 72 hours. And it is an aggressive dose to obtain adequate fetal drug levels because we just hope that the baby will respond to sinus rhythm and have a better outcome. If not, it is ineffective, then we deliver the baby and fetus is well preserved. If, however, the fetus is less than 37 weeks, then we definitely initiate maternal transplacental therapy because we want to avoid iatrogenic prematurity. So what are the options? We have a long-standing history with digoxin, flecainide, sotalol, and amiodarone. But it is important that whenever we give these drugs, we have to monitor the pregnant lady with continuous cardiac monitoring for at least initial 48 hours, that is around 5 to 6 initial doses, and a daily ECG has to be done. Because as you can see, digoxin, flecainide, sotalol, all can cause some or the other ECG changes and they are proarrhythmics. So if you what therapy you want to choose, it depends on what type of arrhythmia you have. So as there is a long list of tachyarrhythmias, but our general focus is on SVT and atrial flutter because they are most significant to fetal life. So flecainide has come up in the biggest way as the most effective drug for supraventricular tachycardia with 90 to 95% cardioversion rates and 60 to 80% in cases of eye drops. And sotalol has come as the most effective drug for atrial flutter, especially in hydropic fetuses. Amiodarone is usually used when there are refractory tachycardias when all of the treatment fails. There is no RCT demonstrating the superiority of one antiarrhythmic over the other, and flecainide, due to its superior efficacy and the lowest side effects, has been generally now suggested as the first line by the American Heart Association as well. And sotalol is now used as the first line for atrial flutter, especially in cases of eye drops. Digoxin is also used at many centers and is an effective and safe treatment and most long-standing history. So these are the recommendations given by the American Heart Association that if you have a fetus with supraventricular tachycardia and there is no eye drops, the first line will be flecainide. However, if there is no conversion, you can go to second line with flecainide and add digoxin, or you can do sotalol plus digoxin. And third line generally is reserved at amiodarone. But if the fetus has supraventricular tachycardia and eye drops, they generally like to begin with flecainide and digoxin or add sotalol. In comparison, if you have a fetus with atrial flutter, which was the main difference as discussed in the previous talk, if you have atrial flutter, the drug of choice is usually sotalol if there is no hydrops. And even if there is hydrops, you add digoxin to sotalol. And then you move to second line and third line. But how do you titrate this therapy? So, transplacental absorption of antiarrhythmic drugs usually decreases in hydrops, and higher doses in combined regimens are needed. Then we need to assess the fetal response to maternal therapy in the 48 to 72 hours. And if cardioversion is not achieved, we increase the first line dose before adding a second drug, but keep a close watch on maternal ECG and plasma levels. If no cardioversion is obtained, even despite this regimen, we assess individually and modify the transplacental treatment. We wait for at least 4 half-lives of the drug to pass to avoid any possible interactions. And rarely, we might require direct fetal antiarrhythmic treatment via the intramuscular route. So these are algorithms given by the Barcelona group for treatment of SVT and atrial flutter, and how you can titrate the doses based if there are cardioversion or not obtained. As a fetal medicine person, apart from this, we need to focus on the antenatal care and delivery constitutions. So, antenatal care, I would like to monitor the maternal heart rate at follow-up visits, which is mandatory. We need to do a weekly ECG, serum drug levels, monitor for adverse effects, check the blood pressure, and look for development of Mirror syndrome. And once cardioversion is achieved, then usual obstetric care can be followed. For the fetus, a daily fetal movement count, a fetal heart monitoring 2 to 3 times a week, and a weekly NST or biophysical profile is must. The mode of delivery is usually cesarean section, as fetal heart monitoring in labor is quite difficult. Coming to the neonatology perspective, without whom we really cannot manage these babies. So the need to prepare the delivery room. Is the baby hydropic? Is the resuscitation ready? Does the baby have a structural heart disease? Is the baby in sinus rhythm at delivery? And what medication is the mother receiving? So based on this, all you need is a 12 ECG as shown by Dr. Mani. It helps in identifying, classifying the rhythm abnormality, and without wasting any time, the therapy can be given to the baby. So let me run you through 1 or 2 cases. This was a case of supraventricular tachycardia, a 22-year-old primea gravida referred to us at 23 weeks, structurally normal heart and intermittent supraventricular tachycardia. 250 to 300 was her atrial rate with an ventricular conduction of 130 to 150 with a 2:1 block. There was no hydrops. But when we started her on flecainide, 100 milligram TDS, we achieved sinus rhythm, continued the close fetal maternal monitoring, and delivered at 38+2. Postnatally, the baby was asymptomatic. This was another case which presented a challenge. It was an SVT with hydrops. She was a 23-year-old, second gravida, previous no living issue, spontaneous conception, referred to us at fetal heart rate of 240 at 25 weeks. And when we did her echo, we found that there was no structural abnormality, but the ventricular and atrial heart rate were 265. As you can see, there was minimal pericardial effusion, there was gross ascites, there was pleural effusion. However, her MCA was normal. She was started on flecainide, ECG was done, but there was some QTC prolongation. There was some abnormal electrolytes, and we had to stop flecainide and actually give digoxin. We thought we will give her direct IM digoxin if fetal heart does not improve. On day 3, when we did, the maternal digoxin levels came as normal, but there were some atrial ectopics. The fetus was really not responding. We thought we might have to move to another drug. We planned to review the atrial ectopics after stopping digoxin. But on day 4, eventually, the QTC of the mother normalized, the dose of digoxin was settled, flecainide was continued, and the fetus was also reverted to normal sinus rhythm. And day 5, patient was discharged, and she was followed up, and she had a healthy baby. Now, this was another case of atrial flutter. This lady presented as 35+6 weeks. The first thing when it was, let's deliver. But at 35+6, we still had hope. The atrial rate was 440. The ventricular rate was 220. Biophysically, the fetus was doing well. The baby was started on flecainide and digoxin, and the baby responded and had a term delivery. This was another case, very interesting, recent most case. We had an atrial flutter with high drops. The fetal heart was continuously at the rate of 425 per beats per minute. The ventricular heart rate was also 220. We admitted the lady and we planned to initiate digoxin plus sotalol. Family was counseled, baseline maternal evaluation was done, the fetus and mother was kept on monitoring. And in this case, we had to actually give 2 times IM digoxin to the fetus, which was after which the baby actually responded. And it was on day 18 that we were able to reach sinus rhythm in this baby. And this was the sinus rhythm that was obtained on day 18 in the same fetus. So transplacental therapy was a success. Maternal and fetal condition was monitored and was delivered at again 37 weeks with a successful outcome. So with this, our experience has been that we have seen around 17, 18 cases, and most commonly it has been supraventricular tachycardia. And we have been able to administer fetal therapy to these cases, and the median gestational age has been 37 weeks for us. Now, let me quickly take you through one small, again, fetal bradyarrhythmia. Now, again, the same roadmap has to be followed. A diagnosis by a fetal echo, rule out non-cardiac causes like loss of fetal well-being, any drug intake, transitory conditions like hypotension, fetal head compression, establish the rhythm, classify the block, identify what is the cause, counsel the parents, antenatal care, and make a perinatal plan. Treatment options are offered for immune heart block, and let's talk about some prophylaxis. So step 1, we diagnose the fetal bradycardia. Step 2, we establish the type of bradycardia based on what is the AV ratio, what is the A to V relation, and is there any presence of high drops. So we all know what is first degree, second degree, and third degree. So I will focus on third degree in my management. Once we have this kind of a block, we see if it is an underlying cardiac disease, because if it is an underlying cardiac disease, then it is associated with a poor prognosis. Immunological tend to do better as we have lot of immunosuppression therapies available with us, and rarely they may be isolated. Whenever we have an immunological case, we must rule out them by the presence of an anti-Ro and anti-La antibodies, and this actually may be the first sign of a maternal disease. So this is the patient information sheet that we hand over when a patient has congenital heart block, what it is, how it works, what are the consequences, and what are the treatments available. Now, the treatments available to us are steroids, which is dexamethasone. It reduces the inflammation and prevents progression of heart block or incomplete block. The adverse effects we know are growth restrictions, so these babies need to be monitored for biparietal diameter and femur length, oligohydramnios, ductal constriction, and even maternal diabetes. The main indication, which is not debated at all, is second degree AV block. In first degree AV block, it usually doesn't work, but however, it is still recommended to prevent further progression, so it is usually considered. In third degree, there is usually no use, so only used in complete heart block when there are signs of inflammation like valve regurgitation, cardiac dysfunction, or effusion, and we definitely stop it if there are any maternal or fetal adverse effects. The second drug is IVIG. It improves the survival if you have endocardial fibroelastosis or ventricular dysfunction. There is limited data and actually no evidence on optimal doses and duration, but what we are following is 1 gram per kg at our center, usually 4 times, given within period of 2 weeks of diagnosis, and additional dose once a month if the treatment is started between 16 to 30 weeks. Then we have beta mimetics, which are very important because they increase the heart rate of the fetus and help in prolonging the pregnancy, although they have no survival benefit. The most common drugs that are used are terbutaline and salbutamol. So if you have a patient who is diagnosed with AVB and you have done an anti-Rola, it has turned out as positive, and you have no structural cardiac defect, if it is a second degree block, we start dexamethasone 4 to 8 milligram orally and hydroxychloroquine for 4 weeks, monitor for progress. We reduce the DEXA dose after 2 weeks to 4 milligram and monitor the heart rate and function. We reduce or further stop DEXA if the atrioventricular interval is reduced. However, if they progress to complete heart block, then you have to stop dexamethasone as it has no role, and actually monitor the baby for signs of high drops and heart failure. And a weekly assessment for fetal and maternal well-being has to be done by obstetrics and fetal cardiology. To date, there is no standardized therapy for first degree block, and maternal dexamethasone or HCQ cannot reverse it, but still it is recommended due to its therapeutic effect to prevent progression of heart block. What about if you have a third degree heart block? There's no role of dexamethasone. Just check the heart rate. If the heart rate is more than 55 or is the heart rate less than 55, and there are signs of hydrops and cardiac dysfunction. So if the heart rate is that is beta agonist drug. You can administer IVIG if there is endocardial fibroelastinosis or cardiac dysfunction, and a weekly assessment is performed. Prognostic factors are counseled to the patient. What about the antenatal care? So the heart block in the baby and actually be the first sign of underlying maternal autoimmune disease. So work up the mother for connective tissue disorder, requires period echographic assessment of cardiac functions. If there are no signs of heart failure hydrops, the goal is to reach 36 to 37 weeks. In case of heart failure and hydrops, it will be evaluated by a multidisciplinary team depending on the gestational age. Delivery will be by elective cesarean section in all cases, and birth will be coordinated in level 3 center with a prior communication with the neonatology and pediatric cardiology. So this is a sheet format we use where we document all the findings of our heart block patients and use them for follow-up. A word about prophylaxis. Is it preventable? So traditionally, we know when we have an anti-ROLA mother and a prior baby with congenital heart disease with no structural heart disease, we start these mothers on hydroxychloroquine 5 milligram per kg per day before gestation. What about if she comes to you in pregnancy, a positive anti-ROLA antibody? So she has no previous neonatal lupus. She needs to be monitored for PR interval 2 weekly from 18 to 28 weeks. And if she has a previous neonatal lupus baby, then a PR interval has to be done weekly from 18 to 32 weeks. If it is stable, less than 150, then we do nothing. We just keep the baby on follow-up every 2 weeks till 34 weeks and once thereafter. However, if there is a progressive increase or it translates to PR interval more than 150, which is first degree, then we consider dexamethasone and follow up thereafter every 2 weekly. But what is the new thing? The new thing is treatment with hydroxychloroquine, which is recommended now starting in the conceptional period till delivery in patients who are already known carriers of ROLA, whether it is her first pregnancy or there is history of prior fetal or neonatal AVB. Because the benefit is seen in secondary prevention with these antibodies with as high as a risk reduction in 50%. So now HCQ has come in our guideline where when any positive ROLA mother, we start the mother on HCQ and then do the monitoring. So taking to the last case, this is a 25-year-old lady, primary gravida at 32 weeks, referred with fetal bradycardia. It was a spontaneous conception, perceiving normal fetal movements. There were no problems. However, an ANA titer was 1 in 100. NT&B scan was not done. Dual marker was not done. Level 2 was suggestive of a fetal heart rate, which was low. She came to us at 32 weeks, and the fetal heart rate was seen to be very low, around 50 to 58 beats per minute. And when we actually did a echo, we found some regurg also. So when we reviewed the case and there was no hydrops, we monitored this baby, planned to start salbutamol at 5 milligram if the fetal heart drops. However, it did not drop. And this baby was delivered by cesarean section and did not even require pacemaker initially. So this is our experience with 21 cases. We've had 18 cases. We were ROLA positive and 3 were cardiac anomalies. Most of the cases were diagnosed at less than 24 weeks, mostly at anomaly scan. Mostly were anti-Rho positive, which is more prognostic than even La. Most of the patients had a complete heart block, and we were able to have 14 live births in this category. 6 babies required neonatal pacemaker requirement. So to conclude, early detection through fetal echo remains essential for timely diagnosis and management. There is a substantial perinatal mortality, but treatment is available. So it is important to have close multidisciplinary follow-up and early intervention, which may improve neonatal outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anubhuti, for such a